Sheri, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with us today. Maybe first, can you introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be part of this festival of political ideas. My name is Sheri Hamilton. I'm a member of the executive of the Marxist Workers Party in South Africa. As you know, our party came into existence in 2019 after the split with our comrades who were in the Workers' and Socialist Party. And before that, we were part of what was then called the Democratic Socialist Movement. And before that, even the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the ANC. And I think that's perhaps as short an introduction as I can get. It explains, our history in relation to our position to the ruling ANC party in the past and the position that we are adopting now as far as these elections are concerned.
Precisely because the elections are going to be next weekend, and the ANC in a historical position is likely to lose its majority in the parliament. So why is that? And do you think that after the elections, a new period is going to open up? What do you think of the general perspectives there?
Well, I think that, since 1994, in the first decade of the new democracy, there were some improvements in the lives of ordinary people. There were big programs of house building, although the quality of those houses were poorer than the ones provided by the former apartheid regime. But there were significant improvements in the lives of ordinary Black people in South Africa. Most important amongst which was, the fact that people no longer had to suffer under the discriminatory laws of apartheid. It was a real achievement and a real gain in the sense that people felt that this burden of this repressive regime was off their shoulders. But in the last 2 decades, especially in the last decade, many of these gains have become undone. All the socio-economic conditions have deteriorated very drastically. In fact, some even say the conditions are now worse than under apartheid. If you just look at some of the statistics, we have 32% unemployment in the country, 42% if you take the broad definition that includes people who have given up looking for work in the last 2 weeks. The situation with health and education is in dire straits, with overcrowding in schools recently because of the austerity measures that have been introduced since 1996 in reality. This means that those initial gains that were made, even including in education and health and so on, where more children were able to enter into schooling, the quality of the schooling has considerably decreased in the last decade or so because of the cutbacks, with fewer teachers getting employed, huge classes like 50 to 60, 70 students, school students in one class. The whole education system is in crisis. I speak very passionately about that because that's, where I work. But also health is in a similar condition. Most recently, in fact, last week, there was a demonstration of cancer patients who were demanding that they get the treatment because the government had actually made available some 50 billion, an amount like that, for the provision of radiation therapy and so on, that would be outsourced to private providers because they themselves can no longer provide that facility because the health system has declined. There's huge corruption in all the state institutions right across the board. There isn't a state institution that has remained untouched. And that is why we have seen huge protest movements in the country. South Africa is known for 2 things in terms of its statistics, that it is the protest capital of the world and that it is the most unequal country on the planet. That is the 30 years of democracy summed up in terms of what we are faced with in South Africa at the present time. In terms of the elections, there's wide predictions in the polls that the ANC will not make a 50% plus 1 to rule, that there will be forced into a coalition. Many of them, however, predict that it would be between 40 and 45%. And the 45%, I think, has largely to do with the role that the ANC is playing in relation to the Palestine question. There's a lot of support, especially amongst the Muslim community and the left in general. Some amongst the left who would not have voted for the ANC probably will, actually, because of the stance that they've taken in relation to Israel in taking them to the ICJ. I was listening yesterday to a video where the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, was giving an annual lecture for Shireen in memory of her second anniversary of her death. And, she was making the point that, it's not about the elections. She was very at pains to say, that South Africa's stance on Israel and its position on solidarity with Palestine, has been there since the days before apartheid was dismantled because of the solidarity that was shown by the Palestinians. However, we are very much aware of the fact that they've not done much as far as disinvestment is concerned in relation to Israeli companies that continue to operate in South Africa, that they continue to allow South Africans to participate in the wars, in the armies in Israel. There's a lot of hypocrisy, but nevertheless, the fact that they have taken that position is something that we would support because it does bring attention to what is happening. And for that reason, we wouldn't sit on the sidelines and criticize, because any kind of solidarity to raise awareness, to do something about the cause of the Palestinian masses is something that should be supported. So, 104 new parties have registered for this election. There are 16 independent candidates. And of these 104, 36 failed to meet new requirements, regulations for new political parties to get registered, because they see that it's going to create lots more complications. The one political party that we would have given critical support to is the new Labour Party that has just recently been formed by the Mining and Construction Workers Union. AMCU is a union that emerged before Marikana, but it came into the public domain at that time. Many of the workers that formerly belonged to the NUM went into AMCU. And it was during that strike, of course, that we played a role as the DSM in supporting the independent strike committees by facilitating the process for those independent strike committees in the different mining shafts to form a coordinating structure so that they could coordinate their actions across the mines. Unfortunately, the Labour Party, although they tried to fight it in the courts, their case was dismissed because they were arguing that the elections should be postponed so that the parties that were excluded could have a fair chance to register. The most likely scenario is that if the ANC doesn't get 50+1, that they will go into a coalition with either the DA or the EFF. But the situation is very, very fluid at the moment because, the DA and the EFF are not gaining support. And all of these new parties, the ANC is very concerned about the new MK party led by the former President Zuma. They are certainly worried about what will happen in KwaZulu-Natal. That's his base. They are worried that they're going to lose to MK in that province. We're not sure about that. It's really hard to call what will happen. Obviously, the Bush would prefer an ANC-DA alliance together with, these latest parties like Action SA and Rise Mzansi, the latest, the newest, because those are all die-hard capitalist parties who, want the unions to be, not quite say that they must be rid of, but they want to scrap the minimum wage, dismantle some of the labor laws and so on. Those are the kinds of parties to the right of the ANC that the bourgeois would rather see them form a coalition with. And then on the center right is the EFF. They are fearful that the EFF would want to do all that they threaten, but they've never ever really shown any interest in implementing any of the demands that they've made about nationalization now it's become really reduced to a land bank or some nationalizing the Reserve Bank and so on. They are seen as the party that flip-flops the most because they changed their position. At one point, they were supporting xenophobia when they went around the shops to demand from the employers to see if there were no illegal workers, especially the hospitality industry. But now they call for the opening of the borders. Their position is like that all the time. So in terms of the coalitions, certainly the ANC will be the biggest party by far, still, even if it falls below the majority. But who it will form a coalition with is not very clear. It may opt even to go for the much smaller parties. It is a hard to call election, and that's why it's seen as the most important since 1994. So that's the situation. There's a high level of apathy amongst the youth still, because there isn't really any of these parties that they would rather vote for. People are going to vote to punish the ANC. The smaller political parties are appealing to the masses on the basis of race, of xenophobia, of seceding even from South Africa. The xenophobic sentiment has resonated because of the role that the trade unions, ironically, I would say, have played in not coming to the fore and putting forward alternatives. Comrade Vavi of SAFTU has even almost implied in a statement he made on the media that workers should take action themselves to get rid of illegal foreign workers. If that is the position of the trade union movement and the so-called most progressive of them, then you can see that there is a real problem. This kind of sentiment of xenophobia would dissipate very quickly if the organized workers' movement could take a clear position on this question. Yeah.
It brings me to my next question. As you mentioned, the apathy of youth, but what about the working class struggle? What about its independent organization? You mentioned this new party, you mentioned the corrupt backwards role of some trade unions. So what about that?
After the COVID pandemic, there was a slight decline in the number of protests, community protests, service delivery protests around because of the collapse of services in everything. You know, water, sanitation, sewage flowing down the streets in the townships, informal settlements, and so on. So protests almost every day. That has increased again. It's not to the pre-pandemic levels, but certainly getting close. There were 2,500 protests in the first 6 months of 2023 figures. Protest levels are increasing. Even when it comes to strikes, I mean, you know, there is a decline in the number of strikes, and that has been a steady decline over a number of years. And that has to do with the fact that the economy is simply just not growing. The GDP of South Africa has been 1% for a decade, and they predicted that it would be very good if they can make 1% over the next 5 years. So the decline in the number of strikes doesn't have to do with the fact that the workers don't want to fight. It's simply that there are no jobs. And those workers who are in jobs are fearful of losing their jobs. However, it is important to point out it's also got to do with the role of the trade union leadership, who are signing agreements for long periods of time, non-strike agreements for salary increases for that period of time. It's their role as well in holding back the struggle of workers through not actually fighting the poor levels of increases that are on offer. The public sector workers themselves, the government has not even offered the wage increases that they had signed into the bargaining council agreement signed with the trade unions. There's been no fight by the public sector unions, many of whom are in an alliance with the ruling party in the form of COSATU. The nurses, the teachers, the police services, and so on are all affected by these kinds of agreements, and their leaders, the most loyal supporters of the alliance, do everything in their power to keep it that way, including going against the resolutions that were made at the last COSATU Congress when workers wanted to disaffiliate from the alliance, and the leadership just went ahead and declared that their federation would support the ANC once more in this election. So it's not that there is no struggle, even amongst the workers that remain in the alliance. It's these factors. It's understandable that as far as the organized working class, that is the picture. But still, there are lots of wildcat strikes. Strikes that are not supported by the union, that are unprotected, where workers are taking huge risks, which shows the level of exploitation that is happening, where workers are prepared to take the risks. You have an increase as far as community protest is concerned. You have the situation with the organized workers. And as soon as the registration process starts at the universities, there will be student protests. And that has been consistent since 1996, actually. We were involved in the early days of those protests when we established the Socialist Students Movement and later the Socialist Youth Movement. The student struggles continue. Every year, despite their so-called free education in the form of a bursary scheme, your parents have to earn less than a certain amount in order to qualify for that. And because of the cutbacks in education, the universities are forced to take on more students so that they can get the money through the loan scheme that the government offers to make up for the cutbacks, you see. So there's overcrowding. They're not employing university staff, and that obviously is compromising the quality even at a tertiary level of education. Besides that, you have all this demands on university academics to publish, to produce these journal publications, so they give them more credits. So they tend to focus on doing that and neglecting the teaching aspect of the work. So this is the situation. The struggles on the ground continue. And because of the election, there is obviously more interest that one can tap into. That is certainly something that we are taking advantage of. There's greater interest now in our position in relation to the elections and what we're about. There is a slight uptake as far as that interest is concerned. For that reason, it's important for us to participate. And it's for that reason that we tried everything in our power to get the Working Class Summit, which I should come back to call for a meeting to invite this new Labour Party to address it and to see what kind of support can be provided. There's been no support from the left in general and from other trade unions for the new Labour Party. That is because union rivalry on the one hand, but also because I think on the left, this trade union was always treated with some skepticism because of the leader. He's quite a controversial figure who's, used quite questionable means to get rid of opposition. The interesting thing about this Labour Party is that it was called into existence by a special national congress. It comes out of a resolution that was taken by workers, by mine workers. And the resolution that was adopted calling for the establishment of this Labour Party is quite radical. Unfortunately, the radicalism of that resolution is not expressed in the manifesto of this party. But here's a platform that is given us to go and say, but here is what your members have called for. This is what we should be standing for. This is the kind of manifesto that we certainly would give our full support and backing to. We have tried to persuade the Working Class Summit, which is this structure that was established by the South African Federation of Trade Unions when it called for the formation of a Workers' Party at its Congress. And we have been fighting for this Workers' Party in the Working Class Summit structure that was established after the summit in 2018, where there were over 100 organizations representing over 1,000 community organizations, trade unions, and so on, who adopted a resolution also to call for the formation of a workers' party. The structure was set up to help bring that about. So there were attempts to work towards that end, but it got stalled because, again, it has to do with the leadership, unfortunately, in SAFTU and some among the steering committee of the Working Class Summit who played quite a negative role. But throughout the years, we have fought for the summit to be reconvened so that the processes can be started up again to build towards the formation of a workers' party that we are hoping to participate in.
It's about clarifying the class position because of the obviously very huge political crisis in the working class organization and of its independent class organization. So it's actually huge importance for the working class to regain its political independence. And also in trade union movements, obviously, that would have a huge impact on the situation. So what do we stand for in the sense of what do we think this party should have as a kind of policy, and what other slogans do we put forward for the situation?
No, you're absolutely right to pick up and to highlight the class question, because that is really what it is about. Of all those 104 plus 14 that exist in parliament parties, none of them represent or have been brought into existence by the working class, by any kind of organized formation of the working class. The Labour Party does represent the only party, and that has now been excluded from participating in this election, that would have represented those interests. Despite what it says in its manifesto, certainly the workers who have brought it into existence have their expectations. And certainly it would have put them in a pole position to fight for their resolution to be implemented that calls for socialism. Our work now is to continue to call for support of the Labour Party. I mean, the election is just but one moment in politics, and we will continue to call for support for that, but we will do so on the basis of a platform that we think will unite the working class. And that platform has to do with calling for free education, free health, right of recall, every workers' representative on a workers' wage. We'll put on to the forefront the question of climate, the question of women. Those would be some of the minimum demands that we would make, and explain that none of those things can be achieved on the basis of capitalism. The question of climate change won't be solved without real intervention from the working class by actually taking over the means of production in the country and making sure that the economy is planned in a way that takes cognizance of the environment and all the problems that we as human beings have created, as not us as human beings, I must exclude us, but the capitalist class has actually done, and that the working class in particular has to pay for. And the same on the question of women. There was a huge movement of women in South Africa a few years ago about the high levels of violence against women, femicide. And although it's come down slightly, South Africa's femicide levels still the highest, 6 times higher than the average rate in the world. Those kinds of questions can only be addressed really through a socialist transformation of society, because the situation that can free women from the abusive relationships that they're in, the crime that drives it, all of those kinds of things that lead to these conditions can only be addressed through a socialist transformation of society. Nothing short of that is going to bring that about. So that is our activity at the moment. We are trying to set up a meeting with the leadership of AMCU. They only lost the case last week. We certainly would want to put pressure on them to build the party and to use it as a basis to unite in the different spheres of the struggle, uniting the communities, the students and youth, together with the workers. The possibilities exist for that. There's a tradition in South Africa of what we call locals, where communities and trade unions come together to talk about how to take forward various struggles, whether they be at the workplace, support through the communities, through boycotts in the past, etc., or whether it is in the community where the workers would also, provide support and sometimes go on strike. There is that tradition, and we would like to see the attempts at rebuilding such locals through AMCU and other trade unions that are beginning to realize that they have to rebuild the movement from the ground up. We would certainly participate and work and put forward the ideas for socialism and the socialist transformation of society.
Yeah, that is what is on the agenda, isn't it?
Yeah.
All over the world.
Yes.
Well, any final words for us before we're...
Yeah, I would want to wish you success for this festival that you're having, and I hope that our ideas will attract a lot of support and that people will join our sister organization in France. And if you know of people in South Africa who are interested in our ideas, put them in contact with us through our sister organization in France, and we will certainly follow up.
Thank you very much, Sheri. Thanks.